Hey guys, this is Erwin Raphael McManus, and this is the Genius of Podcast. I have a really special guest today. He's a personal friend. I've known him for decades. His name is Craig Groeschel. He's the founder of Life Church. He has paved the way in the integration of church expansion and technology. He's a leadership expert. He's an extraordinary communicator. He's been the person entrusted to lead the Global Leadership Summit. He's an amazing human being, great husband and father. And you're going to enjoy unwrapping the genius of Craig Groeschel and discover some of the genius within your own life. But before we dive into that, I want to let you know that we have just launched The Art of Communication. It is a 6+ hour intensive study of the art of communication, 28 different segments that will guide you in unwrapping the communication gift that's inside of you, waiting to be developed, harnessed, and unleashed. I want to encourage you to go to theartofcommunication.org and pick up the resource and begin your journey into becoming the best communicator that you can possibly become. I am so excited today to have my friend Craig Groeschel with me on the Genius of. And while Craig would never in a million years identify himself as a genius, it is inescapable that so much of what he has accomplished really has been a work of genius. And frankly, Craig is the first pastor that I've brought onto this particular conversation, this podcast. And a lot of it is because Craig has this amazing ability to translate his genius, his leadership acumen to both the world of faith and the world of organizational science. And Craig, man, it's so good to have you here with me today.
Hey, thanks, Erwin. I'm really honored. You've been a hero to me forever, and such a good friend and encouragement. So it's I don't feel like a genius, but I'm glad to be on the Genius of. So thank you.
All right. Well, I know you don't feel like a genius, but wouldn't you have to admit that you've had an unexpected, disproportionate amount of influence from someone in Oklahoma?
I would say yes. What we're able to do exceeds anything I ever hoped to do. And I'm sure we'll talk a lot about this, but I don't feel like it's really a reflection of my brilliance as much as a reflection of being around brilliant people, which I think, you could say that's a form of genius is recognizing talent in people. But I am incredibly thankful to be around world-class leaders all the time. And what we're doing here really is a reflection of the brilliance of people that I serve with every day. So,
I think I first became aware of you when before you were Craig Groeschel, and in the mind of the world, you wrote. I think your first book was Chazon.
Yes, it was.
And I think my publisher or someone gave me a copy of the book before it ever came out, and he said, "Hey, there's this kid named Craig Groeschel. I think you'd really like him." I read the book, and we used to do a conference here in LA called Origins. And so I got at least 1,000 copies of that book, and I gave them to every single pastor from all over the world who came. And so my small claim to your fame is that before anyone knew how much impact and that influence you would have in the world, I saw it right away, and I wanted everyone to pay attention to what you had to say. And so I don't know, was that 20 years ago?
That was quite a while ago, and if you moved 1,000 books, that was probably a pretty big percentage of those books that are out there. So,
well, I definitely did. But again, even that book was about vision. Mm-hmm. So early on, you seem to have identified that one of the things that you brought to an environment was a sense of clarity and perspective and vision. And so I kind of want to be, because I think a lot of our listeners aren't going to know a lot about you. Can you tell us a little bit about Life Church? I mean, I know that right before the quarantine, you were listed as the largest church in the United States. For everyone who has never heard of Life Church or of you, Craig, could you kind of give us a small summary of what this whole movement looks like?
Sure. So Erwin, we're a church that's 26 years old. My wife and I started it with a group of really 40 incredibly passionate spiritual leaders back in 1996. And we started in a little 2-car garage And that was, oddly enough, when we didn't have anything, it was as special as it is today when we were blessed with a lot. So we started there and the church started growing slowly over time. And by slowly, I do mean slowly, meaning it, grew eventually to 100, and then eventually to 150, then to 200. And so the early years, it was kind of slow. We met from there, from a garage into an elementary school and then a bike factory. And it took us a few years to build a building. And we were in a little bit of a unique time, just in kind of what I'd call church history or church life in our country, in that we had some opportunities that were not possible in the earlier years. And so in 1999 or 2000 or so, we had grown to where we were mostly full in a bunch of services in one place, and started to ask the question, would it even be, what are we going to do? We can't build fast enough. Would it even be possible to do church in a second location? Is that even legal? And so at the same time, I know now that there were other churches experimenting with that, but we didn't know them. They didn't know us. We thought we were the only one. And so we started in a second location. And then after a while, because now video was a possibility, we started to ask, would it be possible to communicate a message on video in a place that maybe we weren't? And so we were on the very front end of experimenting that. Fast forward to today. As of this recording, Life Church will meet in 38 physical locations in 12 different states. And then the other couple of things we were able to help pioneer was we were doing a real version of church online, not streaming, back before that was kind of a thing, and kind of learning how to create a digital community. We were on the front end of that. And then we were, again, this was not by any kind of brilliance as much as by first one to the game. We created a Bible app that we released on the very day that Apple released apps. So we were one of the first apps in the App Store. And that first weekend, with one part-time 19-year-old developer that put together this little app, we had 83,000 people download the app on the first weekend. So the 19-year-old had a full-time job on Monday when it came out. And as of now, that app is on a bunch of devices and is making a real difference around the world.
I remember all the way back in, close to 2000 when you guys were starting to move toward, I think it's around 2006 or so that
Yes.
you're moving into videos. And I was driving to 4 different locations, doing 5 gatherings here in LA, driving 200 miles in between all the campuses. And we had a brief time together, and you told me about going on video, and you said, you're crazy to be driving live in every location. You need to go to video. And I think one of the interestingly challenging things for us is that LA is the place where everything's on television and film.
Right.
And so it was actually harder for us to move to video because the very people who work in that don't want to go to that on Sunday.
Right.
And but you just blew the top off of it. And I remember just shaking my head sometime going, it's unbelievable what is happening through Life Church, not only across the Midwest, but then across the entire United States. So it seems like there's a definite relationship between the ideas you guys had trying to solve a problem that you're facing with the technology that was emerging at the same time. And I think it was yesterday I was talking to my wife and just talking to her about how so many times when you have an idea that's ahead of its time, there isn't the mechanism to implement that idea. Like,
Right.
Da Vinci, I imagine helicopters and submarines, hundreds and hundreds of years before the technology would ever emerge. But you seem to have an incredible acumen to identify a need and a strategy that also has the complement of technology. And very, very few, not just pastors, very few business leaders have been able to integrate those things really, really well. Were there any particular things that were happening in your world? Because you wouldn't think, oh, how does that happen in Oklahoma? But basically, you innovated things that other people are imitating all over the world now, from what people would not consider like an epicenter of technological revolution. And so what were some of the things that were happening that allowed you guys to have those kind of conversations?
Well, a lot of it was we were young, and the great thing is we didn't know what wasn't possible. And so we kind of had a philosophy of we'll try to figure out the what and determine the what, and then figure out the how later. And so we just were not afraid of failing. and we did fail a lot. For example, video teaching, some would say that we were one of the first to kind of master the art of video teaching. Well, the truth of the matter is that our first couple of video services that we tried failed and went away. Our first out-of-state church failed and went away. So the success we have now is born out of the experiences that we learned from the failures. So it wasn't that we were good. It's that in many ways we were stupid. We were willing to try some things. And then we had I would say I was with people that we as a team were relatively good at anticipating the future. So one thing I love about you in the church world is you are in the church world, but you think with a business mind, and in a way that I think is honoring to God, if we can use spiritual language.
Sure.
You're anticipating what's coming, and so much of what we learn that we apply to spiritual principles, we actually learn in the business world. And so I have always been a student of what's happening outside the church, everywhere. I learn more about how to make a difference in the church by what's happening outside the church. And so we just look at trends. Where are things going? And so I play a game with myself all the time of trying to anticipate trends. I'm wrong a lot, but I'm right sometimes. And so the more we look ahead, and anything from how are we going to travel to what's coming in fashion to how are we going to entertain ourselves to what's, where are you going to get your entertainment? Where are you going to watch content? What's going to happen to people watching content? How social media impacting people? Are more people going to like it? Are they going to reject it? What's going to be hot? What's not? And so I try to live with a future-oriented mindset of saying, where are we going? And then when you do get it right, you don't have to get it right all the time, then you can move whatever you're doing forward. And so that's what we were doing. We were always looking forward, looking for trends, guessing. And again, we started you may or may not remember Second Life when it came out years ago. So we thought everyone's going to have a second life. It's digital. and so we started a church in Second Life. And that got a lot of news articles written about us, but it didn't go anywhere. It was a failure, right? And our YouVersion Bible app, which is now, we just celebrated it being over 500 million devices, which is we're really thankful for. That was born out of a failure, which was an attempt. We built a website called uversion.com that was supposed to be back in 2004 or 5. It was supposed to be a combination of like Facebook, YouTube, and the Bible. We wanted people sharing content, creating their own content around Scripture to try to create a community. Well, nobody did it. So that failed miserably. So we were anticipating that technology could be a way to help people engage in Scripture, but we didn't anticipate an app. An app wasn't even a thing, but we had this rudimentary design. And so when apps came out, we said, let's try it. And that worked to be, over 500 million devices today. So it wasn't brilliance. It was just always surveying what's coming. How are people engaging relationally, content, grow, and that kind of stuff. And being around other people who are willing to try was what made it really fun. And you don't have to be right every time. If you're right one or two times really significantly, then you can make a big difference.
By the way, I use your app every week, if not every single day.
Love it. Thank you.
Yeah, so once you guys came out, I basically went from my hard, present
paper,
Bible to you guys are my Bible now.
I love it.
And some of it is, as you get older, it's hard to see print. So,
you can make the font really big, right?
Yeah. So you guys really do make it accessible to me. So I have to ask you then, what are some of the things that you see in the future right now? Not that you have to be right, just what are some of the things that are piquing your interest or your curiosity of maybe the world is going in this direction?
Well, I think in every different category, I would have like questions, curiosity, concerns. So everything from how do people entertain themselves? What are they watching? What are they not watching? I'm real fascinating with the impact social media is having on our well-being, meaning it does add value and it does complicate life. How do people form community? Meaning, COVID was a face-to-face complicator, and then it created, pushed people in different directions. Everything from like where do they office, how likely are they to go to physical buildings? I'm looking at the future. Everything. What's going to happen with our education system? Are colleges going to adjust, or are they going to struggle? how are we going to educate, to, how do we train leaders? So I'm looking at everything. If you're asking specifically for the church, I can answer that. If training leaders, in pretty much everywhere I'm looking, I'm full of questions and theories that may or may not be right, and they're often not. But I just feel like we should be students of every type of industry. Like I'm looking at your fashion. What are you doing? What's Erwin doing? How what's coming next? And I'm obsessed with trying to anticipate so we can leverage what we care about with what's working and where the world's going, rather than fighting. And the older we get, meaning neither one of us are the new kids on the block anymore, the easier it is to become a critic rather than student. And I'm going to fight to be a student, not a critic. Let's always be learning, watching. And the key, as you know, is being around brilliant people, because that's you learn so much. And every time I'm with you, I walk away with 3 new ideas.
No, that's so good. No, and there's so many people who listen to the Genius Of who are in the business world, and they're always trying to figure out, how to optimize their own impact and how to make a difference in the world around them. And I think that era where the church and the rest of the world are so segmented is pretty much gone. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the reasons you're so effective is because you don't really think of them in different categories. And, but it's been interesting in the pandemic when I know it's not the same in Oklahoma, and you didn't have the same extreme necessarily response that we've had in California or New York or Seattle, but you still have been impacted by it. Mm-hmm. And are there some things that you've seen in the shift of the way that that people are engaging, whether it's in faith or in the business world, that we're going to have to adjust to? Because people aren't coming back like to church the way they did before. They're like the engagement of people on a live stream or in the social internet space is almost like their permanent church now. That's one of the things that we've seen more and more, is that it's not plan B for people, it's plan A for people. And showing up present is maybe plan B or plan C. Are there some things that are happening in that space as you're thinking through the future?
Well, I think, of course, it's really fascinating because, and again, LA is very different than Oklahoma. Even today, in how people approach gathering and such. But it depends on the area. Like if you're talking football games in Oklahoma, they are 100% packed out, sold out, every seat full. If you're talking about church and or even movie theaters and other places like that, they're not at all. And mm-hmm. So what we have to acknowledge, whether we like it or not, is that people are choosing some things and they're not choosing other things that we valued before. And a lot of my pastor peers think that their online game is a real success. And based on the numbers, some people would say that ours is. I'm just not real satisfied with it, because I feel like that, we were pioneers in kind of digital ministry. And so I'm a big, big, big believer in it. But I'm also aware of the opportunities, meaning we can go to places we couldn't go otherwise. We can be available 24 hours a day. We can cross language barriers. We can go geographical barriers. There are no limitations as far as content communication. But as far as what happens in transformation, I think there are some limitations, meaning if all I'm doing is having a one-way relationship with content, I think that's a much more limiting factor to any kind of real development than having community experience with content, or just with the community alone. I think the value of community, and it doesn't have to be community in a building, it can be digital community, but community matters so much. So we're recategorizing wins. What is a win? And a win is not just a click. Win is not just someone watching for a few minutes. Win for us is engagement. So we're asking, how do we engage people both digitally and in buildings? And the church is not what happens in a building. It never has been, but it's never been more of not that right now. It's got to be what happens on the street. And so how do we engage people where they are in what we call the 167? So if a typical church service is an hour long, there's 167 other hours during the week. Is how do we do what we do in the 167, not in the one? And that's going to really matter. So we're looking at a lot of what I'd call the 167. What do we do to meet people where they are and create an interest and a dialogue, and then just like developing the next generation of leaders is on the front of my mind with top level passion, and it absorbs a big percentage of my interest right now.
All right, let's go to the front of your mind, because I know you have the Craig Groeschel Leadership Podcast. Mm-hmm. For those of us who've been involved, the Global Leadership Summit out of Willow Creek, when they needed to identify a new leader, they went to you and asked you to lead the GSL. And you're identified as really one of the premier leaders in the States. And leadership is a front burner thing for you. It definitely, it seems to me, where you're putting the weight of your energy and focus. Are there some particular characteristics you look for in what you consider a person who has not already, it's easy to identify a person who's already a leader, but there's that transitional spot between when everyone knows someone's a leader and the person who can identify leadership knows they're a leader. Are there certain things you look for in the early stages? You go, okay, I know this person's going to emerge to really make a difference and have tremendous influence.
Yeah, massive question, and we could talk about it for hours. But at its root, what I really believe is that everyone has the capacity for leadership. Some people have more capacity than others, but at the foundation, I try to help people understand that what is leadership? In its essence, leadership is influence, and everybody has influence. So I don't let anybody I'm ever talking to say, well, I'm not a leader. Leadership is not about title and position. It's all about relationship and influence. So we have to start there. And I just will not let anyone ever say, I'm not a leader. I want to help everybody see that you have leadership capacity. With that being said, there are some people that with the right development can become world-class leaders. And how do you recognize that early? And the answer is, you don't always get it right, but I look for a bunch of different things. One thing is, someone else has said this, the best indicator of future success is past success. So I want to find somebody that was good at something, and I don't really care what it is. Like anything, that they were excelling at art, at a sport, they were the class bully, they were the class clown, they were whatever it is, that somewhere in their life, they were becoming great. And what I found, Erwin, is that extremely great leaders always have an extreme downside. The greatness is born in the extremes. And a lot of times we overlook people because of their extreme weaknesses, their extreme vulnerabilities, their extreme downsides. Great leaders they're a little bit weird, right? They are a little bit weird because they are. So I'm looking for people with extremes. like people that are oddly, weirdly passionate about something, anything, with a kind of focus. I'm looking for resilience in people, someone that's not afraid to fail. I'm looking for people that have some sense of gathering, meaning when they talk, or even if they don't have a natural charisma, they've got trust. Like when they say something in a meeting, everybody listens to them. They may not say much, but what they say matters. I'm looking for coachability, teachability, humility. I would rather have a B talent that's coachable than an A talent that's full of pride. And so, everywhere, all the time. I promise you, any conversation I'm having, I'm trying to get to this, like what you do. The story behind the story is, what has it made you who you are? What's the driving force? Where are you great? Where are you great and you don't even know you're great? Where are you so great? It's so natural that it's just like breathing to you. And then what is it that you value? So almost every time I'm with somebody with high interest, I'm almost doing an interview to see, what do you have? What's in you that you don't know that's in there yet? How can we bring it out? How can we help you be more successful? And then when you just get obsessed with helping other people become great, there's a reciprocal respect, there's an honor. And what we're doing is like at our church, it is a leadership development factory, period. Not because of me, it is what it is. People say, how do you develop a leadership track? There is no track. The whole track is a leadership development track. Everything about it, from the day you're interviewing, you're in leadership development. From your first day there, it's leadership development. And so what we're trying to do is make everybody grow and great in their leadership. And then it just becomes this flywheel of everybody getting better. And there's a lot of what goes into that we can talk about it if you want to, but it's, I believe in whatever organization we lead, whatever type, we should have at the top of our list a passion for building leaders. We're not building followers or doers. We're building leaders who create leaders, who reproduce leaders. And then it doesn't matter if you're if you're in fashion, if you're in film, if you're in church, if you're in business, if you're in tech company, entrepreneur, whatever, it's all about people. The potential of your organization rests on the strength of your people. People. What's most important? Is it location, strategy, product, customer service, people? Yes, because they develop strategy, customer service, systems, location, all that kind of stuff is people. So we rise and fall on the strength of our people.
That's so good. And only a person who has actually worked in the space of church life would know that 9 out of 10 times churches are seen as therapeutic organizations rather than transformation organizations. And so you're actually dealing with a different side of the spectrum. You're saying ours is a leadership system. You come into Life Church, you're now in leadership boot camp in a sense, which is very different than saying, our intention is therapy. And just to help a person maybe deal with their emotional well-being. It's not that you're not dealing with that, but that's not the end game.
No, you're creating other leaders who create systems, who create environments, who create the potential for that to happen. And so I can do it 1 on 5 and create a good therapeutic environment, or I can empower 5 leaders who can empower 5 leaders who can create 25 environments or whatever that would be of care. And so, yes, we're not trying to we're not building followers. We're building people that build leaders, and that works in any field, and especially in ministry. We should be the best and most passionate about reproducing life-giving leaders in caring for other people.
Now you said over 30 different campuses.
Yes.
So one of the great challenges, and I remember years ago I was talking to Mark Burnett, from The Voice, The Apprentice, Survivor, whatever, all the shows. And he told me, he goes, when you have one store, you can control the culture. When you have 2 stores, maybe you can go to one, your wife can do the other, you can control the culture. He goes, once you have a 3rd store, you have a diffusion of culture.
Exactly.
Yeah. And he goes, and there's a sense where if you're going to go past 3 or 4, you have to accept the fact that you're almost like the culture you want almost has a half-life. And you have to decide what part of that half-life do you really value? What part are you willing to let go of? Like when you have multiple campuses, I can't imagine they all look exactly like you wish they looked like, and that there might be some diffusion from the campus where you are at the epicenter. How have you identified the right kind of leaders that personify and are able to create the kind of culture that Life Church actually is and values?
That's a great question. And I want to say this sometimes leaders, we overspeak, right? We're too confident, we brag, whatever. And so what I do want to say is that this was not always the case. In fact, there were years and years and years that if you went to several locations, I would have been embarrassed by what you saw. And there was inconsistency. I would say now we could pretty much drop you in one of 12 states, one of 38 locations, blindfolded, and you would have a very consistent experience and you wouldn't even know what state you were in. And that didn't happen accidentally, and it didn't happen overnight. It took years and years. And it was very, 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 very hard to get there. And like you said, to be truthful, they're not all equal. There's something everywhere that's just a little bit better, or could be improved. So it's not complete, but it is consistent. And that takes time. What happened, exactly what Mark Burnett said, down exactly. 1 is like breathing air, 2 is relatively easy, 3 is chaos. And it's like parenting. You have 2 kids. If you're married, you got man-to-man defense. You go to 3, you're in zone defense for the rest of your life. and it's when we went to 3, 4, and 5, it about broke us. And so in any type of organization, what you have to do is you have to restructure at that point. You're not thinking one or the other or one. You're either thinking one or you're thinking all. So I'm thinking my local, or I'm thinking all of them. And that's a big shift. What most experts will say, and I tend to agree, that then the next change happens around 10, the next around 30. That when you hit around 10, you have to reorganize, restructure, and the next around 30 or so. And that's consistent with what we've seen. Along the way, when it almost broke me, was between years 11 and 13. I don't even remember how many locations we had, but if you can imagine, we were pioneering this. There was nobody to really learn from. And we were in maybe, I don't know, a couple states then or whatever, and maybe 6, 8, maybe 8, 9, 10, 11 campuses, whatever it was. And we were not guarding the culture. It was like different places, and it was something I didn't like, I wasn't proud of, and I was miserable. I didn't think I could get it back. And we had division at the top, all this kind of stuff. And so what we had to do is we had to recognize that at the top of the list of what we are is we are guardians of the culture. And these quotes are not mine. I'd give credit to, I don't know who they are, but they say culture eats strategy for breakfast. It's so true. What is your culture? It is a combination of what you've created and what you allow. That's what it is. It's what you create and it's what you allow. So therefore, to have the right culture, what we have to do is we have to have cultural values that are not just written on a piece of paper, but they're tattooed on our heart. And they're not, in my opinion, they're not just words. And this is just my opinion. And it's not that big of a deal, but to me, it's a big deal. I want emotion, and I want emotional connection behind our values. For example, we could say we value evangelism. Okay, that means reaching people that don't know God. In our culture, we say we'll do anything short of sin to reach people that don't know Christ. To reach people no one's reaching, we got to do things no one's doing. Okay, that's my emotional connection. We could say we value empowering people. But the way we say it is that we are not spiritual consumers, we're spiritual contributors. The church does not exist for us. We're the church, we exist for the world. I could say we value generosity. I'm not going to say that. That's, who cares? Everybody values generosity, or we should. I'm going to say we will lead the way with irrational generosity because we truly believe it's more blessed to give than receive. So what we're going to do is we're going to take what are two types of values. One are what are our core values, and I'm going to create some kind of an emotion around them. And then we're going to lead to it, drive to it, create it, and not allow anything outside. Then the second thing we want behavioral values. This is Patrick Lencioni teaching. Core values, what we believe. Behavioral values, how we behave. So we're going to look at our best performers and ask what behaviors do they have in common? And then we're going to name them and we're going to live by them. So when we interview for those values. We can teach skills, but we can't teach values. So we want to see what are in our ethic. It's work ethic, it's initiative, it's resilience, it's sense of humor. We have a list of behavioral values. And so those are our two sets of values. So we cannot do what we don't define. We can't defeat what we don't define. So we want to define, here's what we believe in our core, and there's emotion around it. And here's how we behave. And there's context and passion into it. And so then when you pour into the culture over and over and over again, what happens is a healthy culture self-corrects. That means if someone's culturally wacky, someone says, hey, we don't do that here. That's not how we behave here. And either we move them out of the culture or we help them correct to our behavior. And that is, again, that is leadership. That's at the top of everything. And so every meeting, we're driving culture. Every gathering, we're driving culture. We walk into a room, we're driving culture. We see something outside of culture, we don't allow it, we correct it. We create it, we correct it. And then over time, if we do that well, then you drive culture deep into the organization. And it's not a reflection of Erwin, but it's a reflection of all your leaders. And that's when it works. It takes a long time to get there, especially in a multi-site, multi-state, any type of organization. But it's doable.
Man, that is so good. I know from my end and from my experience, one of the great challenging things is to think of the culture as static. Because I taught something even 20 years ago, and then 15 years ago, and then 10 years ago, and 5 years ago. Then I look at our community after the pandemic. I'm realizing 80% of these people are new. They have no idea what I said 2 years ago. They have no idea what I bled for, what I was living and dying for. And it's almost, sometimes it can be exhausting going, I have to start all over again because they're drawn to the culture, but they're not reflective of the culture. Mm-hmm. And I think as a leader, sometimes you have to keep reminding yourself, especially when it's the church. I mean, in businesses where there's constant turnover, it's the same thing, but culture is so dynamic that the negative culture will take over if you're not really proactive and intentional.
100%. Yeah. Cultures never drift toward health by accident.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
You never just take your hands off, go away for 6 months and come back and go, oh, we're just accidentally better. And we're in multiple locations, but we just became more alike by accident. And so it takes a lot of hard work and intentionality, and there's no shortcuts to it. It's a hands-on creation that takes not just effort from the top leaders, but from every leader in the organization.
Yeah, and I find sometimes people mistranslate your values. And I know for us at Mosaic, we've always been about reaching people who would never even consider the message of Jesus and who are so outside of faith. But what people oftentimes see is, the creativity, innovation. And so they would take on the creativity, innovation without the heart for people. Yes. And I'd go there and I'd go, hey, you've been here several years. Where are the people who have come to know Jesus? They go, oh, no, we're like super culturally sensitive. And I realized, you don't really understand what drives what we do. It's not creativity that drives us. Yes. It's connecting people to Jesus that drives us. And the creativity is an outcome of that.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Yes, that's so good. And so true that people will misinterpret your success and focus on the wrong thing without understanding the why behind the what. And that's something that matters so much.
Now, you said that you've worked hard to getting continuity. Mm-hmm. Do you feel like what's happened is that there's more standardization, or do you think that it's more that there's a greater integration of values and then they naturally begin to reflect Life Church? So
super good question. And there's a lot of layers to this. So anytime you're scaling up in multiple anythings, mm-hmm. chicken restaurants, clothing stores, churches, whatever, you're going to have a tension of a balance between control and freedom. How much, what do we say you have to this way, and where do we give you flexibility? So what I believe is in the early years of multiplying, scaling, franchising, whatever, you want to go a little bit higher on the control. And the reason is because you need to. If not, you're going to lose the special sauce, the values, the magic, the punch, the drive, the whatever that made you special in the first place. And so you go a little higher on control. If you go too high on control, or what ends up is you end up training people to think like managers and not like leaders. Right. Meaning they're a store manager. That's all they are. They just show up and run the place. And so then you end up killing a little bit of what makes the place special. So once you have the systems in place, once the values are strong, and once you've got some consistency and continuity at that point, and you've got some tenured leaders, at that point, you'll probably want to loosen up a little bit on the control, and you want to give a little bit more freedom so that people continue to think creatively. So these are the things that we always do. These are things we never do. And yet we believe in you, and we're going to give you some autonomy to create something that's a reflection of you. Meaning, we've got a church in Albany, New York. That's a totally different culture than Mustang, Oklahoma, and right? And Southern Florida and New Mexico and Kansas City and such. And so we don't ever compromise here, but we do give you some freedom at these other places. And again, what we discovered is early on, if we were not high control, then we had high chaos. So we have to have higher control early on. Once the values are established, once you've got some consistency, then if we're too high control, we squelch any kind of leadership growth, then we've got to let go a little bit. And so that's where once you get your systems in place, you get healthy, then you can see the culture start to reproduce. What you have to have is you have to have a culture that reproduces culture, meaning when you step in wherever you are, here's the values, here's the what, here's the why behind what we do. And then that it does get, when the culture is stronger, it's easier to spread. When it's weak, it can be anything.
Well, here's an uncomfortable question.
Yep.
How central is your voice to creating the culture in all the different locations? You may not remember this, but years ago, you and I had a conversation. It was a great perspective shift for me because you were saying, hey, you need to go to video in different campuses. And I said, I don't know if we can do that. And you said, Erwin, it isn't about you. And I kept thinking, moving me on video to all locations makes it more about me. And you had this other side perspective that said, no, you not needing to be there makes it less about you.
Yes.
And I thought this is such an interesting thing, looking at the same thing from two different places. And because we're both trying to do the same thing to make it less about ourselves. Mm-hmm.
But you saw it as a transferability of your voice, but not necessarily of your presence and personality in that space. But there's no way to escape the fact that you cannot have a life church culture without Craig Groeschel's voice speaking into that culture.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So to answer your question, in the early years, it is impossible to describe how important my role, my voice was, meaning whatever you think, it was more important. And if it's you scale out of 1 to 100, it was 110, meaning it was everything. Now, it would shock you at how far that percentage has gone down, because it's not what happens in my presence that makes us strong, but what happens in my absence that makes us strong. And so now, yeah, it is, meaning my whole staff hears from me 3 times a year in a leadership setting. I say that 3 times we gather all together. It would be about five times a year where I would bring a kind of a leadership unifying talk. So 5 times in a whole year, meaning there's 52 weeks they're hearing from somebody else, and it's not me. And
so on Sundays, you would be bringing the message only 3 times a year.
In what I call staff leadership development, I'll be bringing the message. Yes.
What about on Sundays to the church life?
So it depends on the week. There would be, for example, next weekend, I will have 38 pastors preaching at 38 different locations. The weekend before, I might have a guest speaker speak to all of them, and then I'll do, a significant portion of the weekends. But again, that's delivering spiritual content, and that's incredibly different than creating a culture. Now, you do want to create culture in your preaching, yes, but you don't create culture in a 30-minute, 45-minute message. You create culture all during the week. And so in my mind, why is it that there are some really great communicators that don't have great, growing, significant churches? Is because of what happens during the non-sermon time that limits them. And I would say I'm not one of the top tier communicators. I'm certainly a good communicator, but I'm not. There's a lot of people that everybody would agree, yeah, they're better than you are. But what happens in the non-communication time is where what we specialize in, and that's creating systems and environment and cultures that are reproductive in nature. And so all the way down to Erwin, like if I go and visit a campus this weekend, which I might, because my message is pre-recorded, because I don't have to do it live, because it's not about me in the room, meaning I will not preach anywhere live this weekend, anywhere, because it's pre-recorded. If I go and visit a campus, I will never, and I never have ever one time ever gotten up on stage to greet people. The reason I haven't done that is because the moment I get up on stage and greet people at some other campus, I will undermine the credibility and the authority of that leader. And so by sitting on the front row, what I'm saying is I'm under his or her leadership, or I'm supporting their leadership, and I'm just here attending, and it is not about me. And that's intentional. So it is, again, back to your original question, obviously always going to be an important part of it. If I go away for a year, it does suffer. If I go away for 3 months, it's not going to suffer that much, because their strong voices creating the culture. And it's impossible to describe how important I was in the early years. But I'd say it this way, it's impossible to describe how everyone else is important today, meaning I'm still a big part of it, but I'm certainly not the most important part of it. I'm just a part of it. And that's sincere. Important, but not the most important. Meaning if I'm not good at getting vision and passion and values into other people's hearts, then we're never going to be good. So it is not about me, it's about the team. It's not what I know that matters, it's who I empower. It's not what I do that matters, it's who I trust that matters. And that's what builds great leaders. That's what brings retention. And that's one of the strengths we have, like our core executive team. We've been together over 2 decades. And so that's pretty rare. They don't leave. Our top tier leaders, they just don't leave. And the reason they don't leave is because they have the freedom to lead, because I believe in them. And give you an example. Forgive me if I'm talking too much. Who do I interview? I interview some people, not everybody. Do I interview my assistant? Yes. My assistant's assistant? Maybe. Our CFO? Maybe. The CEO of YouVersion? Maybe. Campus pastor? Maybe. The person over the campus pastor? Maybe. The person who's over all 50 youth pastors? Maybe. Youth pastors? Maybe. Life Kids pastor? Maybe. The person who's over all 50 Life Kids pastors? Maybe. The answer is, of all those people, the only interview I've done was my assistant. None of the other ones. None of the other ones. In the early years, I interviewed everybody. In the later years, I interviewed my assistant. None of the other ones, not the CFO, not the CEO of YouVersion, not all those things, because I trust our people. I've empowered our people. It's not about what happens when I'm in the room. It's all about what happens when other people are in the room. And that's how you create a reproducing culture that thrives in multiple places. And what the hardest thing is that's hard, because I would rather be more important than I am, right? I'd rather be more needed. I'd rather walk in the room and everybody look to me. But if they're always looking to me, then we're really limited. And so that's when I tell you that I don't feel like a genius. I feel like I'm surrounded by geniuses. Or if there's any genius I have at all, it's recognizing talent and empowering talent. And that's what I love. I love seeing people thrive in leadership. I love giving credit away. I love when other people do what they're uniquely created to do. And I love when they love it so much they don't leave, because they get to do it in a place where they can do it well. And that's what's super exciting to me.
That's so good. All right. So one of the things I love superhero movies, and I think I like Marvel more than DC, but I'm still into DC. And one of the things I love is that every superhero has an origin story. Mm-hmm. And I think that's also true for every reflection of genius has an origin story. And I think the interesting juxtaposition here with you, Craig, is that you love surrounding yourself with genius. You love surrounding yourself with leaders. You love empowering other people. But you were a tennis player. Mm-hmm. If I remember correctly, you played college tennis.
Yes. Which
one of the unique characteristics of tennis players, like skiers, mm-hmm. is that they don't have to depend on anyone else for their success on that court. So it's actually a very independent sport. It's not a team sport unless you play doubles, and that's barely a team sport. Mm-hmm. And I'm just kind of curious, first of all, following this in two tracks, when did you begin to discover that you were particularly good, even at tennis? What was it in your mind that began to form when you were a kid that said, I think I can do this well, or if I do this, I can be really good at this?
So this is probably, I don't want to make this a long story, but tennis wasn't my best sport. I didn't even like it that much. I was a baseball player, played football, played soccer. And
so you're just an athlete.
Well, my dad was a great athlete, and I was a pretty good athlete. And so I took up tennis in high school. I was late in the game, and I got burned out on other sports. And so I just got sick of them. And I had offers to kick in football and tennis, and I had the best scholarship I had was tennis, so I took that one. I would say, if you're asking about the leadership end, was odd is I honest to goodness felt insecure, insignificant, nervous everywhere. Always felt like I wasn't quite as good enough athlete as somebody, wasn't popular, was whatever. And it was in college in a fraternity that got in a lot of trouble, that suddenly I found myself rising to a place of going, we got to do something about this. And that's when I started to discover that I actually had the ability to move people in a direction. And it scared me a little bit, because I thought, oh, they're actually looking to me. And what happened, Erwin, is we had 4 guys commit grand larceny in our house, our fraternity. And so they were going to kick us off campus. And I stepped into the president's role out of a complicated thing. So I wasn't even the elected president. I just stepped into it. And then suddenly I had to try to save the day, save the house. And they looked to me and they listened. And I had some decent instincts and led us into survival. And back when you're in the fraternity, you think that's all there is, and life and death falls on, are we going to be brothers forever? And that's when I went, oh my gosh, I have the ability to take people in a direction. And right after that is when I became a Christian. And then I recognized, oh, I have the ability to use that to help people find the freedom I found. And that's when I started to become a student of it. Like, okay, if this is something I have, how can I get better at it? And how can I help other people get better at it?
Wow. So you stepped into your leadership because of a crisis. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't as if you were going, I'd like to be a leader one day. You just ended up in a crisis situation, and it felt like you were the only one that would step into that situation. I love that. That is so beautiful. Now, you described yourself, I think, at some point as like a Christian atheist.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So explain a little bit about that process of clarifying your own faith.
Yeah. So the term Christian atheist, I have a book with that title, is someone who believes in God but lives as if he doesn't exist. And so I grew up in and a little bit of the story behind the story too is I grew up in a home that we went to church, not very often, but we went to church, but there weren't any believers in my home. And my dad is just now celebrating 30 years of sobriety. So what's interesting is he stopped drinking when he was my age then. So the very age I am now, if you can imagine, he drank his whole life. Every night was drunk. I mean, I never saw him sober, not mean drunk, but just drunk. Every night I saw him. And so I grew up in a home where there's a lot of brokenness and a lot of hurt. And since then, he's become an incredible, great man. And both my parents have had incredible redemption stories. But it was out of that hurt and brokenness that I found strength in anything consistent. Meaning, if I can get up and do the same discipline every day, I found hope in that and freedom in that. And so now, big strength I have is kind of this radical disciplined life. People say you're so disciplined. Like, actually, no, I'm incredibly undisciplined. I just have to choose it. It's like, it is survival for me. And so that's the part of the story I always like, is trying to find out what's the brokenness, what's the hurt, what's the pain, what's the failure that led you to something. And that's what it was for me. It was a childhood of a lot of heartbreak, lot of good times, but a lot of pain that led me to the place of saying, we have to create something better in our own disciplines and our own choices. And then you mix that with what became my faith later on. And then it's like, okay, now I can see it. This is what we're created to do, is I'm going to use these gifts to impact other people, point them to that same freedom, and try to help them become great at doing the same thing. And that's when it's all of it comes together. It's the way you're created, plus what you believe in, plus the power of relationships. And that's when it doesn't matter what you're doing, what you're leading, what you're creating, it becomes special because it's born out of the depths of everything in you that matters.
I just love that so much. Part of what inspired the Genius of podcast was writing this book, The Genius of Jesus. And
congratulations on the book, by the way.
No, hey, thanks so much. And one of the things that for me became so inspiring was just to realize that Jesus expresses the only genius that's actually transferable, that his genius actually becomes a part of the essence of who we become as people. And I'm kind of curious on one side, outside of Jesus, since that becomes the obvious answer, are there some like historic geniuses that inspired you throughout your life, or different people that you thought, I'd love to get a little bit of that magic on my life?
Yeah, oddly enough, and the thing I like most about you is that your ability to go into any kind of audience with people with no faith background, different kind of faith background, and just blend in and love people, care for people. And then eventually, when you kind of earn the right, or sense it's the right time, point them toward Jesus. You're one of the best I've ever seen do that. And so that to me is what gets me. When you go back to some of the revivalists and that just had an ability to connect with people that were hurting and broken, all the way down to, in our lifetime, meeting Billy Graham. I had an hour with him, which was like one of the most special hours of my life. Just anybody who had that ability to not be weird, not be pushy, not be overly religious, but be caring and engage in the lives of people that were hurting, and point them to the freedom of life that we can have. Those are the people I look to. And that's honestly my favorite thing about you. Among everything, like, I love that you're good in business. I love that you're creative. I love Mosaic. I love your heart. I love that we had lunch one time and someone asked for a picture and you said, no, we're having lunch. I thought, are you allowed to do that? Like, I love all that stuff. But the most I love is the fact that you can walk into a room of people and care for them with no agenda, but the way you care for them is so real that eventually they kind of want to know the why behind it. And that's what I admire most about you. And that's the category of any person that has done that in history is when I look to them and admire.
Thank you. That was not a setup question. I did not expect you to answer like that.
No, but I just had to say it. I've always admired that about you. It's a special gift that I haven't seen lived down to hardly anybody the way you do it.
Thank you. There's going to be someone listening right now who is unfamiliar with Jesus and may even wonder why someone as gifted and intelligent and with so much capacity as yourself would actually be a follower of Jesus. What outside of our belief in his divinity, that Jesus is God, you've read the Gospels over and over and over again. What would be one attribute of Jesus that has always been so compelling or that compels you in your own personal life?
So I always felt not good enough, meaning no matter how hard I tried to be good, I'd tell a lie, I'd hurt somebody, I'd steal something, I'd get blistering drunk and throw up and do it the next night, So I always felt that. And the fact that Jesus would have gone out with me to join me in the bar when I was too young to be in a bar, he would have been in the back of the bus when we were telling jokes that were inappropriate and would have just, would have hung out with someone like me the way I was, and in the same way he'd hang out with someone that's very smart and moral and on top of the world, but broken in their soul. He would have done that as well. And so just that kind of acceptance and love for broken people is stunning to me. And the fact that he can lead anyone to something better, a better way of forgiveness and grace and purpose and life that's not just temporary, but life that's eternal. It's I can understand why people don't like Christians because a lot of them bother me, right? Can I just say that? Like they really bother me. Like I don't want to be the kind of Christians a lot of people are. I can understand why a lot of people don't like church and don't like organized religion. I don't see how anybody can look at the Gospels and read about who Jesus was and not admire like that and want to be like that. And so as imperfect as all the rest of it is, and I'm a part of that imperfection, I want to know that guy, Jesus. I want to be like him. I want to help others know him and want to be like him, because you can't read the Gospels and not be blown away by his love and his grace and his truth and his wisdom and his you can not like me, you can not like the church, but you got to admit, man, he is Jesus. He's got to be the Son of God.
That is so good. Craig, I want to thank you so much for joining me today in the Genius of Craig Groeschel. And I just love, I love not only what you do, but I just love who you are as a human being. And I, on a personal level, like when I've always felt an uncomfortable relationship to Christianity and especially almost like to Christian leadership. And when people ask me like, who are the people you respect, you're top of the list. And I just want to thank you for being a human anchor for me of Craig Groeschel is proof that Jesus is real and that the church can be authentic, that it can be an expression of what Jesus genuinely had in mind when he launched this movement that we call the church. Thank you so much. And I just look forward to seeing you again.
Hey, I can't wait. Thanks again. Much love to you. Okay.
Hey, God bless you.
I want to thank you so much for joining me for the Genius of Podcast. I want to thank Craig Groeschel. And by the way, Craig has written so many extraordinary books. I would just encourage you to click his name on Amazon and pick whichever book speaks to you first and fastest. You will not be disappointed. You cannot buy a bad book from Craig Groeschel. I also want to encourage you to go to The Art of Communication and download the intensive masterclass on developing your communication gift. No matter whether you're in leadership, whether you're in sales, whether you're a pastor, whether you're an entrepreneur, whether you're a dad trying to learn how to communicate more effectively with your wife and children, if you're trying to really connect to your authentic voice, this masterclass will be incredibly helpful to you. Let me encourage you to go right now and pick up The Art of Communication at theartofcommunication.org.